Hello, science fiction fans and book lovers in general. I'm Peg, and I actually like science fiction, but a lot of books, other kind of books too, I'm realizing. Anyway, today I'm going to make my first video on the books that I'm reading for September Science Fiction Challenge. You may have heard of it, and I did give my to be read list at one point. But if you haven't heard of it, I've listed below the 5 categories that we're trying to read a book each of those for this month for the challenge. And actually, the book I chose for today, I'm going to talk about today, called Avengers of the Moon by Alan Steele, fulfills 2 of the categories. Takes place on the moon, and it has a rocket ship right on the cover. So 2 in 1, huh? Anyway, I just love this cover, this retro-looking cover. When I saw it at the library, I checked it out before I even knew about the challenge, and it's really a fun story. And actually, it involves some of the history of science fiction that I'm just now getting interested in learning about. Okay, I will. You notice that it says on it right over here a Captain Future novel. I thought, huh? I've never heard of Captain Future novels, and is it a series or what? So I looked around a little bit, and it's not a series. There aren't any other Captain Future novels recently by this Alan Steele guy. Anyways, but it tells on the inside cover the story of it that these Captain Future novels were an earlier series of works, a lot earlier in the 1940s, written by a guy called Edmund Hamilton. And to be able to use the same characters and continue the story, Alan Steele, of course, Edmund Hamilton's dead and gone, but Alan Steele had to go to the estate of Edmund Hamilton and get permission with the copyright laws to use the name Captain Future and to use the same characters and just kind of continue the story. So that was interesting. Actually, I wanted to learn. I had already read this and really enjoyed it, but I wanted to learn a little bit more about the earlier Captain Future books and short stories and novels after I'd already finished this. So I kind of looked back, and I was able to find some of the works are still in print, some of the older Captain Future ones, and I found out that the name Captain Future and the character was first used for a small short work by an editor for the 1939 science fiction convention. So that's where he got his start. Then, during the 1940s, Hamilton himself picked up the name and wrote a lot of, actually started out with a lot of stories in what they then called the pulp magazines. I've heard a lot about those pulp magazines. I think a lot of the science fiction were in those. People would talk about finding them in the drugstore and buying them off the rack and running home and reading them. It sounded like they're probably just big comic books on cheap paper. Anyway, so those were very popular. I imagine in antique book dealers still have copies of them, but though the paper, I'm sure, disintegrates quickly. Anyway, these stories were a lot of fun in themselves. I have to read some of them sometime, some more of them. But in these, a lot of what looks to us now as crazy assumptions were made about the solar system, and but it's fun. I mean, so actually some of those assumptions have had to be updated a little bit in this book. For one thing, they were supposed to be set in the future. Well, the future back then in the original Captain Future books was 1990. So obviously, when this guy took over the story, and we had to move the future since it's now the past, and now they don't give any dates at all for when the future's going to be. So they'll continue to be valid, I guess. Anyway, so the main characters in all the stories and this one are two young scientists, married couple, and their professor, um, who get together and have some ideas of new technology in AI they want to work on. So they can't seem to find a place that would be secret enough on Earth. So they go to moon, which they go to the moon. That was common then. That's not new. They went to the moon and founded a underground laboratory in one of the craters on the moon, very secret. And there they did their work. One of the things that they accomplished was that because their professor, his name was Simon, was brilliant and a big part of the scientific knowledge that they needed. He was getting really old. His body was. His mind was fine, but his body was getting old. So they were able to transplant his brain into an artificial case that was able to interact. I mean, his whole brain was there. I guess he must have had vocal cords or something because he'd talk. Anyway, this case was carried around by a robot named Grog. So all their adventures, Grog and they called it the brain once Simon was in the suitcase. His brain was. Um, this was one of the main characters. I think the case changed. There's something about the case changing its form or shape as time went on too. So I didn't. Maybe we need a movie to kind of get a more idea of this case that held the brain. Anyway, so the in some of the older stories, though it does review it in here, the married couple had a child, a son named Curtis, and he was going to be the future Captain Future, but they were killed by some bad guys, and Curtis was left the future in this underground lab with the robot Grog, the brain Simon in the case, and another android called Otho, who was able to do shape shifting techniques. So they raised the future Captain Future, and when this story starts, in fact, he's now he's grown. The parents are dead, and they're started on a new fantasy, or not fantasy, new big time adventure there on the moon. So I think it would have helped if I could have gotten all those characters straight right at the first. So in case you want to read this, which I highly suggest, you need to know that. Okay, so all these characters continue through, and there's some bad guys that keep coming back, and actually very prevalent in this story of a certain bad guy. The other characters that seem to show up a lot and are in all the stories are some two interplanetary police. And one of those is a young woman named Joan who becomes quite the love interest for Captain Future. Now, Captain Future is not real socially adept since he was raised by an android, a brain, and a robot. But he's learning, and she does think he's kind of cute in this, but he kind of does nerdy things. But I think he's learning. I hope this Alan Steele writes more of these because they're fun and they certainly would be a great series. So anyway, I'll be back tomorrow with my next book in the challenge. But I really suggest this to people who are interested in the old classic fiction, the classic science fiction type stories. It's a good one. Thanks. Bye.